Hi, my name is Tony Fackery. Thank you for joining me today on this video blog entitled Stress-Based Reduction Using Mindfulness. So effectively, what is stress? Stress is something that tends to happen in our life on a recurrent basis. It is our internalization of that stress and how we react to it. Interestingly, it's been shown that with US Navy SEALs who have been sent to deployment in Afghanistan, their blood cortisol levels were taken prior to engagement, during engagement, and then upon return home to US soil. And what they found that there was a natural spike in cortisol, and cortisol is a stress hormone among other things in the body. And so what they naturally found was there was an increase in that stress response, but interestingly enough, when they returned back home, their cortisol levels returned back to baseline. And so what that shows us is that the body is incredibly resilient at offsetting stress, at handling stress. Though the one key ingredient is the way in which we internalize our stress. And it's interesting because in these days and times, we are inundated with stresses. We are inundated with news advising us of how stressed we are. And so what we need to do is not internalize our stress, but rather be mindful of the way that we respond to the stresses in our life. And mindfulness allows us to be more thoughtful. It allows us to bring our thoughts to the forefront of our mind without judging them. It allows us to see, observe, and witness those thoughts before they become more compulsive, before they become more sinister. And it's an interesting fact because the more we become mindful, the more we're able to view our thoughts from a voyeur perspective. So we almost step back rather than engage in our thoughts. And I think the biggest cause of suffering these days is when we believe that our thoughts are true. So if a stressor pops up in our life, and we take that stressor on board and we add thoughts to it or give it meaning, and we give meaning that is not necessarily there, then we interpret and internalize that stress as a thought, which then produces an emotion. And so suffering ensues when we buy into that suffering, when we buy into the thought. So mindfulness then allows us to detach from the thought. Listen, the thought's going to be there. It'll always be there. As long as you are alive and consciousness is flowing through your mind, then you will continue to entertain thoughts. But what this allows us to do is almost step back from the stress or step back from the response and see it for what it is. So mindfulness allows us to be more receptive, more in tune to what is going on in this moment. There are a number of ways that we can become more mindful, and one of which is just to notice how we're feeling in the present moment. So for example, when a stressor emerges in our life, rather than allowing our thoughts to run rampant, and it's what I call a monkey mind. So the mind becomes agitated, and much like a chariot attached to horses, it wants to run wild. But as the commander of the chariot, it's our job to grab the chariot, which represents the mind and the thoughts, and not allow it to run rampant. And so, in effect, we become mindful of those thoughts, and the way that we respond to those thoughts becomes our focal point. It becomes our baseline. So we don't allow the thoughts to take charge of us. And for many of you, you've probably noticed that sometimes it feels like your thoughts are thinking you, and you just can't break the cycle. And so that in itself is the cause of suffering when we try to stop something. So what I'm imploring you to do, rather than try to stop the thoughts, see what is the underlying motivation to the thoughts. Where are the thoughts coming from? What could they be inviting you to look at in your life? Is there something there, either from childhood or something that occurred days ago, weeks ago, months ago, that is inviting you to look at something? when we respond to our unconscious thoughts, then they take on what Eckhart Tolle calls the pain body experience. And so the pain body experience is recalling the past into the present moment and activating that stress response. And if we can see that for what it is, we can see that in this present moment, there are no troubles. Yet, it is our perception, our thoughts, our understanding and our beliefs of bringing the past into the present moment that then distorts this present moment. So in order for us to overcome stress, we become more mindful. So we breathe into our body, and one of the best things that we can do when we're feeling stressed is to breathe. And there's a really fabulous breathing technique that we can use, and again the US Navy SEALs use this on a recurring basis, and it's called the box breathing technique. And I'll explain it quite briefly, but do look up the term online, box breathing technique. And it's a 4-second inhalation followed by a 4-second hold of the breath, followed by a 4-second exhalation, and then there's a 4-second pause before we recommence the breathing pattern. And what that allows us to do is shift from a sympathetic, now the sympathetic nervous system, otherwise known as the fight or flight response, becomes activated. So we move from that fight or flight response in the body into a parasympathetic, otherwise known as rest or digest. So effectively, breathing into our body allows us to become mindful because we become centered and present. So in the future, when a stressor pops up in your mind, whether that stressor be an external stressor, such as a boss, a colleague, a friend, family, or a loved one, or an internal stressor, such as for no apparent reason, you feel stressed out for no reason, then breathe into your body using the box breathing technique. Thank you once again for joining me on this video. My name is Tony Fackery. Thank you also for continuing to subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Thank you once again.